You seem fixated on the beautiful woman in the striking little black dress, flirting with that very handsome and polished-looking young man by the fireplace. She always looks good, but tonight she looks like a perfect blend of goddess and sensuality. She bought the black Dolce & Gabbana satin bustier cocktail dress just for this occasion, along with the Manolo Blahnik navy satin 90mm pumps adorning her feet, making her almost 6 feet tall. Her Victoria's Secret lingerie and stocking set, and Tiffany glittering diamond earrings, completed her look. It took her over 3 hours and several $1,000s to achieve this perfection. That's my wife, Jill. We've been married for over 25 years, and yes, she is very beautiful. I would guess, though, that she is 15 to 20 years older than him. She deflected my question by saying, I thought so. I saw you two coming together. I'm surprised you don't seem angry at her for being so flirty. You don't seem like one of those guys who gets turned on by it either. Are you? No, but honestly, I'm not sure how I feel, I replied. I turned and looked at this woman. I'm not sure how to describe her. She wasn't beautiful, but rather more handsome, if you can say that about a woman. However, she is obviously very bright and definitely exudes sex and class from every pore of her being. Several women at the charity function looked similar to her. My immediate thought was that she might be a doctor or lawyer. I told her, if I'm being honest, it does excite me a little, I guess, but you're wrong about the anger part. Right now, anger is at the top of my list, but I'm also slightly jealous and frightened too. As you can see, my emotions are all over the place. It's like all of them are taking little jabs at me simultaneously, and I can't process them effectively. It's very disconcerting, to say the least. It's been going on now for about 20 minutes. I'm trying to decide whether or not I should go over there and break it up. I turned back to stare at my wife and the gentleman, who now had his arm around her hip and was gently caressing the small of her back. She seemed not to notice and was obviously enthralled with whatever he was whispering in her ear. If I didn't know better and was seeing them for the first time, I would easily think they had been lovers for years. Every move, each touch seemed natural and well-patterned. On the other hand, I want her to have a good time. She's earned it. She has had a rough go of it for a while now. She lost both her parents and her only sibling in the last year. Work has been very difficult for her. She is the CFO for a tech company that has been trying to recover from some very bad business decisions. They have gone through several rounds of layoffs, and the stress on her has been tremendous. But with her help, they have started to turn the corner. In order to handle all of her stress, she has been on a rigorous diet and exercise program for over a year now. You seem very proud of her, the woman observed. I sighed gently and turned back to this curious woman. I am. It hasn't been easy for her. Tonight is sort of a coming out of the darkness party for her. He was fondling the silver heart-shaped pendant hanging from my wife's neck. It was the only item, including her matching lingerie, that wasn't specifically purchased for this evening. It was a locket with our pictures inside that I gave her on our first anniversary, all those many years ago. It wasn't much, but we didn't have much then. She told me she loved it, and 24 years later, even though she could afford much better, she still wore it every chance she got. I told her she didn't need to wear it tonight, but she said it was worth more to her than the rest of her outfit and she wouldn't dream of not wearing it. They were both discussing it, obviously intrigued by the locket as he turned it over, fanning great interest in its simple design. He would let the back of his hand gently caress her breasts over her gown. She responded indifferently, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. It ratcheted up my anxiety level a great deal, though. While continuing to gaze at the two lovers, I asked the woman politely, I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. When I received no immediate response, I pivoted to look at her and saw that she was so mesmerized by what was occurring between the man and my wife that she apparently hadn't heard me. I took a moment to glance around the great room. It seemed no one but this woman, and I had taken any notice of the couple that was the center of our attention. I quietly inquired about her name again as I leaned in close to her ear. As the party progressed and alcohol continued to flow freely, the noise level had increased considerably. She seemed startled, broke her eye contact with them, and turned to me. I'm sorry, I guess I was engrossed with the couple. My name is Tony, Dr. Tony Adams. She grasped my hand and made a formal show of shaking it before returning to stare at them. "Jim Michaels, do you know the gentleman obviously trying to seduce my wife?" I queried, without breaking eye contact with them. "Are you certain it is he who is doing the seducing?" she asked with a wry smile as we both watched my wife drape her arm over the front of his shoulder, her elbow and forearm resting on his chest, as they clinked their crystal champagne glasses together in a toast. "No, I've never seen him before." "He's quite a handsome man, though, don't you think?" she replied. We continued our conversation while never breaking eye contact with the couple, who were now leaning into each other in a very relaxed and familiar manner. Anyone who noticed them would definitely believe they had been a couple for some time. "Yes, I suppose he is," I said, becoming very anxious and trying desperately to maintain a calm exterior. I'm not sure how successful I was. I was trying, in a practiced manner, to speak calmly and in a quiet voice, as was my habit in stressful situations. It was a trait that had served me well in my profession over the years. Most people under increasing stress tend to raise their voices, make threats, or babble incoherent, incomplete, repetitive sentences. I found it advantageous to do the opposite. It tends to embarrass and confuse those in an irrational state. Of course, that was in a business environment, and this was something entirely different. We stood silently side by side, watching them for a few more minutes. There was no way we could turn away. It was too provocative. If it weren't my wife involved, I would find it fairly erotic. I had a thought and sincerely questioned, "Dr. Tony, are you married? What would you do in this situation if you were me?" I doubtlessly said it too quickly for the circumstance and tried to soften my question, but she responded before I could correct myself. "I'm divorced, over 5 years now." "You didn't answer the second part of my question," I pointed out. Now it was her turn to exhale deeply, her breath much heavier than mine. She wistfully responded, "If I'm being honest, I would say 2 things. First, I wish it was me with him instead of her. And secondly, I would tell you to do nothing. It would be pointless. Doing nothing hardly seems the right response here. Those emotions I told you about are starting to get the better of me. The 2 most prevalent are fear and anger. I fear I am losing my wife and I am getting increasingly angry at him. I don't think he has missed the wedding ring on my wife's finger. He can probably feel it on his shoulder right now, never mind see it." At that moment, his hand slid lower on my wife's back, now gently resting at the top of her very shapely bottom as he began to guide her outside to the garden. Without comment, Tony and I discreetly followed, both of us stopping to pick up fresh glasses of fairly decent sparkling wine before heading outside as well. As they passed by the brightly lit doorway into the dark outside, it was evident why she was enamored with him. His tuxedo, probably one of several Emporio Armanis he owned, hung perfectly on a well-toned frame. My tux was rented from J.C. Penney. He was definitely sporting a Rolex. I involuntarily pulled my sleeve over my $59 wristwatch that I bought on Amazon, betting it had the exact same time as the man's Rolex. He was probably 6 feet 2 inches or so, without an ounce of fat anywhere. He had long, wavy sandy-colored hair, like a California surfer dude type, but his face and jawline were tight and rugged. He looked like he had just jumped out of a GQ cover photo. I felt a hand slip around my elbow and pull me in the opposite direction. "Let's sit here and talk a bit," whispered Tony, pointing to a table out of the direct light. It was probably the most discreet location we could find with approximately 100 or so party guests milling about. I noted, though, that Mr. GQ had conducted my wife to a dark corner that offered much more privacy from the crowd. When we situated ourselves at the ornamental iron cafe table, we could still maintain our view of the couple. He chose that exact moment to boldly clutch my wife and kiss her fully on the lips, long and hard. She responded by wrapping both arms around his neck, almost collapsing into him, and returned the kiss with a passion she had never given me. I started to jump up but felt Tony pull me back down. "Jim, don't. Please don't make a scene. It will only make matters worse. Think for a moment." I was starting to lose it and was ready to tell her to screw off and go to this affair when I saw a terrible sadness in her eyes, glassy with tears. "Tony, what aren't you telling me?" I demanded. I was torn between confronting Tony and keeping an eye on Jill and the jerk so they couldn't sneak out. Tony must have read my mind. "Jim, you don't have to watch them. They won't sneak out, they will come to you. Kyle will make Jill tell you what they are going to do before he leaves with her. It's part of his thing. He gets off on the humiliation of the husband. He'll look you directly in the eyes as Jill tells you she's going to spend the weekend with him. How do you know all this? How can you? Wait, you were with him, weren't you? That's why you're divorced. Tell me who that a-hole is and what is going on, or so help me. My full attention was now on Tony. Talk to me. A frightened Dr. Adams spoke quickly. His name is Kyle Rittenhouse. He is extremely wealthy, although no one seems to know where his money comes from. Despite his frequent cuckolding of married men at these events, he is always invited because he donates large sums to the various charities involved, so the foundation's members just overlook it. I glanced quickly around the patio. A few minutes ago, no one even noticed us, but now it seemed as if everyone was watching. I guess the death of my marriage was tonight's entertainment. So that's what happened with you, I said, feeling sick to my stomach, like a solid punch had just been delivered to my solar plexus. Just tell me, please. She was very emotional and hesitated frequently while telling her story. It was a very similar event, and I was there with my husband of 18 years. We have 3 kids. They barely speak with me today. I don't even know where my ex-husband is. I haven't talked to him in several years. Her tears fell easily now. Tony, please, I'm sorry about your family, but just tell me what happened. Exactly what you're seeing going on with your wife. My husband Tom and I attended a fundraising event to upgrade our hospital's cardiology and vascular lab with state-of-the-art EKG machines and other equipment, as well as the latest implantable cardioverter defibrillators. I hadn't been at the function more than 15 minutes when Rittenhouse set his sights on me. It seemed like a few minutes later, I was standing in front of my husband and some other invited dignitaries, telling him I was leaving with Kyle. It really was a couple of hours, though, I'm sure. She broke down again. I looked right at the love of my life, the father of my 3 young teenage children, and told him I was going to spend the weekend with Kyle. I knew my marriage was over when I saw the shocked look quickly turn to anger on his face, but I was going anyway. Tom started to get up into Kyle's face, but a couple of the organizers' security team appeared out of nowhere and physically convinced him to sit back down. I turned and walked away from his pleading voice telling me to stop, but I didn't. Kyle was smiling the whole time with his arm around my waist as we left. Jesus, it gets worse, Jim. You need to brace yourself for this part. It was by far the best sexual experience of my life. It was otherworldly, and despite everything I lost, if Kyle asked me to go with him again, I would. The hell with this. I'm going over there right now and putting a stop to it. Don't do it, Jim. All you will do is embarrass yourself. Look around you. Everyone knows what's coming, and they're all watching you. The foundation's security is already heading over to us. Besides, Kyle and your wife are coming our direction anyway. She's going to go with him no matter what you do or say. I looked behind me, and sure enough, Kyle had his arm around my wife's waist, his hand guiding her as he smirked at me. He never changed his expression or broke eye contact. My wife at least had the decency to look away when she saw my disposition. In that instant, I knew 2 things. First, my marriage was over, no matter what happened in the next 5 minutes, we were done, and secondly, I wasn't going to play the helpless victim and be the evening's floor show. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. I turned back to Tony before they arrived, only to be greeted with the look of a woman who clearly was in lust with Rittenhouse. If he asked her, she would probably have sex with him on the table right now. Damn it. All of a sudden, a large cocktail party that had been very boisterous 30 seconds ago got deathly quiet as I started to try to engage Tony in conversation. From behind me came, Jim, honey, I want you to meet someone. Her voice was cracking as she said it. I guess a 25-year marriage is stressful. I didn't even turn around, I ignored her completely. I asked, to shock Dr. Adams, to tell me about her children. Her mouth dropped open. She tried to recover and speak but only emitted a couple of squeaks. Much louder this time, Jim. I want you to meet someone. This time, with surprise and embarrassment in her voice, she still looked at Dr. Adams, waiting for a response. I continued to disregard them both. Then Rittenhouse interrupted. "Excuse me, Mr. Michaels. You really need to listen to what your wife has to say," his voice laden with mockery. I didn't react to him and repeated my question to Tony. "I really want to hear about your children." Not only was the room silent, but everyone seemed frozen in their places. Tony was regaining her composure, but before she could speak, we were disrupted again. "Jim, please turn around and look at me," my wife implored. I couldn't decide if she was exasperated or aggravated. I turned slowly and glanced at them both. For a moment, they were becoming aware of the scene they were causing, and their discomfort was rising. "Honey, this is," I interrupted pointedly and spoke forcefully while my eyes bore into hers. "Jill, you have never looked more beautiful than tonight. You are truly a vision." Her face lit up, and she began to smile and speak, but I cut her off. "Goodbye, Jill." I turned back to Tony. "You were saying?" People were beginning to titter and laugh nervously at the unfolding standoff. I could sense the two lovebirds' embarrassment growing. Tony started to speak about her 3 children in a light manner, which caused even more reaction from the gathered crowd. Then Rittenhouse made an almost fatal mistake. He put his hand on my shoulder and tried to pull me in his direction. Tony knew instantly what was going to happen. Trying to avoid disaster, she asked loudly, "Kyle, why don't you go home with me instead of her? You won't be sorry." Kyle removed his hand from my shoulder and asked politely, "Do we know each other, madam?" At that moment, I saw an expression of utter dejection on Tony's face. She had sacrificed her family and dignity for someone who didn't even remember her. I can't recall seeing someone in so much pain. What she had done was finally hitting home, and life was seeping out of her rapidly, like air from a punctured balloon. There was something else that flitted across her face. I became genuinely concerned for her welfare. It was time to end the circus. I turned back to Jill and Rittenhouse. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were still here. You may go now." I waved them away with my hand. I always wanted to use Val Kilmer's line from Tombstone, "It only took the end of my marriage to do it." I vaguely heard my wife say, "We'll talk when I get home Sunday night." They turned and left without further comment, but it was obvious that Mr. Rittenhouse was not a happy man. His perfectly structured cheekbones were beet red with embarrassment. It wasn't much, but it was a small victory. Looking around the patio, I could see that the attendees were disappointed there wasn't more of a show. Sorry to disappoint. Maybe next time, folks, I thought to myself. The 2 beefy security guys gave short laughs as they turned and walked away. Tony, having somewhat recovered, offered, "She thinks he will get past this." No, she couldn't possibly. She has to know she just ended our marriage and is going with him anyway. You were right about everything. I felt melancholy. "Thank you for trying, but I have to know, did you do that for me or for you?" "Neither," Tony replied. "I tried to do it for your wife. I have lived for the past 5 years with the emotional turmoil and pain she is going to experience." Something was already dead inside Dr. Adams, and it shook me to my core. "Dr. Adams, I know what you're thinking right now. Please don't do it. It isn't worth it." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "Jim, don't play games with me. Look me in the eyes and tell me you aren't thinking about harming yourself." Funny, my thoughts weren't with my wife or our marriage, but I was deeply troubled that Dr. Adams was possibly going to end her misery tonight. She couldn't look at me, she just dropped her head and wept. "All right, Doc, you have 3 choices. You and I can sit here all night and talk. We can go to a 24-hour coffee shop and speak there, or I can take you home. What's it going to be?" She gave a little snort. "You aren't that great a conversationalist. You may as well just take me home." Still quick with a sharp response, even in the face of all this, I was starting to like Dr. Adams. We drove the 35 minutes to her apartment in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept looking over at her and, even in the darkness, could tell she was having bad thoughts. Most people who commit suicide don't want to die any more than anyone else. They just come to accept that there is nothing else to live for, and their desire to stop their pain is stronger than their fear of death. Dr. Adams, like most medical professionals, had little fear of death anyway. They saw it every day. Doctors and nurses understand that no matter how much physical or mental pain someone is in at the moment of death, you can observe the agonizing scars of age, disease, and pain disappear, and the deceased would have an indescribable look of peace. All the age lines and crevices of ache and suffering disappear, their eyes, long dulled by aging, are alive and bright, and for a moment, they look young again. Many who have been too long in the field and have seen too much are envious of the dying. Of course, it only lasts a moment before the physiological process of death takes over, but it is the last moment that one remembers. For medical personnel and others, such as military and first responders, it must sometimes seem tempting. I had lost my wife, but I wasn't going to lose Dr. Tony Adams. The irony wasn't lost on me. When we arrived at her apartment, I escorted her to the door, took her keys from her, unlocked it, and followed her inside. "Thank you, Jim. I can get myself to bed," she said. "What are you doing?" I asked as I took off my jacket and tie, followed by kicking off my shoes. "I'm not leaving you alone tonight. I will sleep here on the couch, but I'm not going to leave you until I know you're going to be okay. You're too important. Don't even think about arguing." I plopped myself down on the couch and watched her. She just stared back at me for a few moments, then without a word, turned and walked into her bedroom. I looked around the apartment. It was pretty stark for a woman's home. There was not a single family photo or memory to be seen anywhere. Not a good sign. 5 minutes later, she came back out, wrapped in a fluffy blue and white robe. She went to the kitchenette and poured us a couple of glasses from a previously opened bottle of red wine. She came into the living room and sat down on the couch next to me. She once again had tears in her eyes, but they were of a different kind, tears of gratitude. "Okay, Jim, let's talk. Sometimes it doesn't take much more than caring to save someone's life." 5 years later, today was the 5th anniversary of my divorce being finalized, and coincidentally, it was my first grandchild Jonathan's 2nd birthday. Today would be the first time Jill and I had been in the same place at the same time since I filed for divorce. That isn't completely true. We tried to be in the same room once a few months after the final decree, but it didn't go well at all. It was partially my fault. Well, admittedly, it was mostly my fault. I could have taken the high road and been an adult about it, but I was still pretty angry. So when my wife approached me to talk about it in our daughter's graduation reception, I took the low road instead. "Hello, Jim. I've missed you," she said. When I interrupted with, "Hello, Miss Brett. How are you?" she ran crying out of the room. If looks could kill, I would have been dead right then and there. Most of the family members in attendance were shooting daggers at me. I did have to give credit to our kids, though. We raised them right, and they were smart enough not to get in the middle of our separation. But, as they pointed out after the reception fiasco, I acted childishly. They did, however, have the good sense to decide that there would be no further attempts at having the two of us at the same family function. Well, what did they expect? Our divorce was pretty acrimonious. I can't take all the credit for that because, even though I was angry and wanted my pound of flesh, my wife fought the divorce in every way she could. I wasn't exactly sure how she did that in a no-fault environment. I think her strategy was to utilize every delaying tactic possible to make the divorce so expensive that I would give up. Having money, though, is one of the few downsides in a divorce. It can drag on for quite a while, and lawyers get paid regardless. In any case, I wasn't giving up. But Dr. Adams had been right again. Jill thought I would get past her little weekend fling. I wondered if she tried the same tactics during her divorce. I never asked her, though. Jill also somehow got the family law judge to order mandatory counseling. I suppose it wasn't really mandatory, but when the judge looks at you and says, "Mr. Michaels, while I can't order counseling because there are no minor children involved, are you really saying that you can't do a few weeks of counseling to try and save a 25-year relationship? What are you supposed to do?" We agreed. I mean to say, the lawyer agreed, on 12 sessions, but after the third one, both my wife and the assigned counselor knew it was hopeless, and we all agreed to call it off. As I remember, my wife ran out of the room crying then, too. I think the consensus was reached after I said something like, "Do you really believe I'm going to stay married to a 304 who wanted to introduce me to her boyfriend so she could tell me she was going to have sex with him all weekend long in the middle of a damn charity function with a couple hundred people watching?" It was an honest question, but perhaps I could have been more tactful. It did get my point across, though. I did get the last laugh, too. After her counseling gambit, I had my very eager, heavily saddled with tuition debt lawyer amend the divorce petition to include spousal support for me. You see, my wife's total income package was more than twice mine, and after 25 years, I had the right to a portion of it, something about in a manner accustomed to. I didn't really need it, as we were both able to provide for ourselves comfortably enough, but it was the principle of it, right? Although not nearly what I demanded, I did get a nominal amount, mostly because her legal team told her what might happen with her investments, retirement, profit sharing, etc., if we didn't have an agreement in place beforehand. She conceded to the support, and I knew it. Because our finances were always separate, I was happy. The money I put into a savings account for any future grandchildren was just one thing I was happy about. But the thing I was most pleased with was that, as part of the final decree we had agreed to in the settlement, she was supposed to take back her maiden name as her legal name. I wanted to be completely done with her. I know I should have just done a simple split and moved on, but the pain and humiliation from the unmerciful way she destroyed my self-esteem made me feel justified. Now, 5 years later, my anger had abated, and I agreed with my son that his expectation for both his parents to act like adults at our grandchild's birthday party wasn't unreasonable. Plus, he said the entire family was fed up with having to coordinate things so the infantile exes didn't have to see each other. He was being polite because everyone really meant it was just me being infantile. I was always proud of him, and I think a father is most proud of his children when he is confronted with the truth and recognizes that his child is correct and he is wrong. I don't know if the same is true for mothers. So that brings us to today. As I stood in my son's expansive backyard, already filled with entertainment devices that a 2-year-old could not possibly master, it was an exceptionally good family yard. For some reason, it gave me feelings of hope. I had a light beer in my hand, waiting for my ex to make her appearance. I had gone for a double scotch on the rocks, but my daughter-in-law gave me a look, so I settled for the beer. Given what was to come, it was probably a better choice. Maybe Jill would chicken out, but that was doubtful because she had wanted to talk for years. Interestingly, I didn't feel any of the anxiety and anger I felt in the past when I thought of her. Maybe it was time. As I reveled in the backyard's ambience, I saw her arrive. She still looked beautiful. My heart didn't skip a beat, but I did smile involuntarily. I quickly looked around, embarrassed to see if anyone had noticed my expression. She seemed a little nervous but, nevertheless, made her rounds to the family and spent some time talking to the birthday boy. I couldn't tell if she had seen me yet, but I assumed not, so I just kept to myself, staring at what resembled a jungle gym. The only problem was it looked way too safe for a boy to be interested in playing on it. Nearing the end of my inspection, I was disappointed to conclude that there was not even one single way for a kid to injure themselves on it. I heard her voice, "Hello, Jim. How have you been?" I turned to her. She definitely looked good. I stared at the Manhattan in her hand. It wasn't even in a coupe, but a tall bar glass. They made me get a light beer. As I lifted my bottle into her field of vision, I sighed, "I've been good, Jill." There was a bit of an uncomfortable pause, then for some reason, I blurted out, "You never had your name changed back like you agreed to." Surprisingly, she didn't burst into tears and run out of the party. She merely responded calmly, "So? It's not like you haven't done it before. I didn't have it changed because I still consider you my husband, even if in your eyes and the laws, I'm not." I couldn't help but laugh. She used to make me do that a lot. "Okay, Jill Michaels it is, then. You know, I've been keeping tabs on you," she offered unapologetically. That raised my eyebrows and my hackles. "No, I didn't know that," I snapped at her. She waved me off with a brush of her hand. "Oh, don't worry. It's not anything sub rosa. I met your friend Dr. Adams. We've talked quite a bit the last couple of years or so. Actually, we've developed a bit of a bond. It might be too soon to say we are friends, but I think we are good for each other." I was beginning to believe our meeting today might have been a very poor idea. She noticed my expression. Please don't be angry with her. I begged her not to tell you. I know you two are good friends, and I didn't want to ruin that. I just wanted to try to understand how I could have done what I did to you, to us. Honestly, we don't even discuss you. We just try to help each other, she expressed sincerely. Wow, weird. I should be very upset, but I'm not, I thought. I'm not angry with you, Jill. Have you two made any progress in your understanding? I quizzed, without a trace of rancor. Some, but it is a work in progress. She is quite a woman. She told me that you saved her life. No, I didn't. She saved herself. I just provided the opportunity for her to do so. I couldn't believe I was saying this, but I was truly interested in understanding more about what happened, or more accurately, why. I surprised even myself with how calm I was. Would you like to sit down and talk some? Jill had to choke back her emotions. Yes, Jim, I would very much like to talk about it. We found an unoccupied table as far from the crowd as we could and sat facing each other. Before we start, Jill, just promise me no matter what, you won't lie to me. We have too much of a history together, and we're too old to play any more games. If you ever had any love, any respect, any feelings for me at all, just please don't lie to me. She was already crying. It seems that if there is one thing I am good at, it is making women cry. She nodded her head definitively and spoke softly, I promise. She pulled out a handkerchief, wiped her eyes, and blew her nose. Not very ladylike, and it drew attention from the gathered party guests. I couldn't help but smile at her. You know, the handkerchief thing always bothered me, even when we first met. Here was this beautiful, self-confident young woman, a woman who knew what she wanted in life. You were so gorgeous, charming, and feminine. You were always an attention-getter from both sexes. You were so special, and yet you blew your nose like a cigar-chomping, fat, middle-aged truck driver in a restroom at the local truck stop. Some things never change, I guess. We both cracked up and laughed uncontrollably for about 5 minutes. I'm sure the family went from being worried we would kill each other to thinking we were crazy almost instantly. But it did break the ice for us. When we had finally calmed down, Jill spoke first. Jim, I don't want to pry into your personal life, but Tony is very fond of you. She's quite attached, and it makes me jealous. I know I don't have the right to feel that way, but I do. She was nervous but not accusatory. How come you never married her? My instinct was to respond with something along the lines of none of your damn business, but instead, I opted for sincerity and openness, understanding that it was past time to do so. Jill, Tony and I are really good friends. We do a lot of things together, and she gives me peace and comfort. Believe it or not, in the 5 years I've known her, we've been intimate less than a handful of times. That's not what our relationship is about. I will never ask her to marry me, partly because I don't want to risk ruining a beautiful friendship, but mostly because of what you did. I hoped I wasn't hurting Jill, but I had to be truthful. I was destroyed by what you did to me. Tony told me that evening and a couple of times since that if that piece of crap asked her to, despite everything she suffered, she would have sex with him on the 50-yard line during halftime at the Super Bowl. I can't risk having that happen to me again. I just can't. I hesitated, unsure of the impact my words were having on her. I continued, you probably don't know it, our kids certainly don't, nor will they ever, but I went through 2 years of therapy trying to understand what happened to me that evening. I know I reacted calmly and as if I was in control, but in reality, I was devastated. Did Tony tell you how often Loverboy pulled that stunt and the fallout from it? Yes, but Jim, I never fooled myself. Even while I was standing there with him, fallen under his spell, I understood what the reality was. He didn't get me into his bed by telling me lies about finding his soulmate in me. He never said it was our destiny to be together for the rest of our lives and travel the world in luxury. He simply told me that if I spent the weekend with him, he would promise me the best sex of my life. He told me that when I drew my last breath on earth, our weekend together would be foremost on my mind. That's all. And for some reason, even 5 years of therapy haven't provided me an answer for why I agreed to it. Well, was it the best sex of your life? This was a moment of truth. Jill never even hesitated. There would be no more lies, at least from her. Yes, Jim, it was. I know that hurts you, and I'm terribly sorry, but I won't lie to you ever again. The truth of the matter is, nothing can compare to it. And before you ask, I would like to think that if he came for me again, I would say no, but I couldn't promise that to you. In fact, I spent the next several months, after I knew you were gone and not coming back, looking for the deep, sensual emotion I had discovered that weekend. I'm afraid I did some shameful things. Tony, who did the same, called it the search for the endless orgasm. Thank you for being honest. It does hurt, but I think a lie right now would have hurt more. I have another hard question for you. Candidly, Jill, over the years, I have actually come to understand why you might have wanted to go with Rittenhouse. Tony and I have discussed her reasoning, or lack thereof, for her actions. I think I have gotten past that part, and maybe if that is all there was to it, we could have worked our way through it somehow. God, I know. Tony told me about your feelings regarding what was happening earlier at the party. I am so sorry. I put my hand up with the international symbol for stop. What I will never be able to get past, and honestly the reason we will never get back together, is the way you did it. Oh, I understand why he told you to do it that way. He got off on the humiliation factor for the poor sap of a husband. But how could you walk up to your devoted and loving husband of 25 years, the father of your children, the man who celebrated every success with you, the man who held you and wept with you at every failure and pain you ever felt in your adult life, and in a public setting, tell me you were going to take a lover and screw each other's brains out all weekend long, then return to me and expect our life to go on as if nothing of significance had occurred? Now, I was the one close to tears. What possessed you? You couldn't even discreetly come to me alone and talk about it privately. She stood silent and frozen for a full minute. She didn't cry, though. Maybe she didn't have any tears left. I don't know, Jim. I honestly don't know. I could give you all the standard excuses about me being worried about growing old, you neglecting me, hormone imbalances, etc., but none of that was true. That's what is killing me, 5 years later, and I don't know how I could do that to you. He simply told me that was the way we had to do it, that it would be best for everyone, so I did it. When he said it, it just made sense, so that's what I did. I knew I was hurting you, but I honestly thought we could work past it. When he took me home that Sunday night, and yes, he took me home, he was a perfect gentleman. But he ended it by literally flipping a light switch in his suite and told me it was time for him to get me home before I got out of the car in front of our house. He thanked me for a great time, kissed me on the cheek, and it was over and done. That's how I felt too. It was over. When I came home, I honestly thought you would be waiting for me. When I realized you were gone, I actually got angry with you for running out on me. Can you believe that? It's why I fought the divorce so hard. I was going to make you pay. Nice touch on the alimony thing, by the way. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You aren't some high school dropout living in a single-wide trailer, working part-time at King Soopers. You have an advanced finance degree and practically run a Fortune 500 company, for Christ's sake. She didn't answer. There was no fight left in her. She was exposed, no part of her hid from me. I had never seen her look so vulnerable. The answers to my questions might never come because she truly didn't know them. How is that even possible? What do you want from me, Jill? She was almost begging. Jim, I want you to save me too. You did it for Tony, and she did the same thing as I did, and you were with her. I just want to be back in your life. I can accept us never being married again, even living together, but I can't live with you not being in my life. It's killing me that I'm made a stranger to you. Up until today, I would have snapped out the obvious response because I was never married to her, but I decided to remain silent. I had no idea how long we had been sitting and talking. I looked around the backyard and saw we were the only ones left. The sun was starting to set in the west. I briefly thought the party was either over or we had scared everyone inside. Jill seemed not to notice. She was still lost in her thoughts about the choices she had made. What did I want? That was the most prevalent thought on my mind. I had been asked several times over the years by well-meaning friends and family, not to mention my counselors, whether I was better off with her in my life or out of it. My resounding response had always been out of it, but now I'm not so sure. The truth is, I miss her. I miss holding each other in bed, winding down as we talked about our days and our children. I miss laughing together at life's comedy going on around us. I miss the smell of her perfume. I miss seeing her naked, wearing only that silly locket. I miss everything. We were perfect once. It would never be again, but then life lived in absolutes is a life wasted. I can do friends, Jill. Why don't we make a standing date to have dinner once or twice a month? I think we still have a lot to think and talk about. Well, I'll be damned, she said, as some tears finally came. Why did I never go after Rittenhouse? Well, he was partially to be blamed for my actions, but it was my actions that were the real problem here. What happened to him, you may ask? His bodyguard beat him to a pulp when he pulled the same act on him. In fact, he was beaten by both his guards so badly that he may never be able to be with any woman, let alone promise her the famed amazing one-night experience. Story 2. My wife, Vanessa, and I lived in an industrial town. Life here was quiet and peaceful. We had an enchanting daughter, Jenny, who was 4 years old. Our life wasn't easy, but I was content. We lived on the outskirts of town in a small house I had managed to buy at a very favorable price. The previous owner was in a hurry, needing money, and I decided to make the purchase. Over time, I improved the house, expanded it a bit, and beautified the surrounding area. I worked in manufacturing, producing various metal parts and structures. I rose to the position of chief engineer on the line, allowing me to earn more to support my family. My brother, Stephen, lived nearby with his wife, Jessica. They also had a daughter of the same age, Athena. Our children got along well, and Jenny sometimes stayed overnight with my brother and his wife. My wife worked as a salesperson in a bakery. At the time, Vanessa seemed satisfied with her job, both the schedule and the working conditions. But soon, everything changed. Vanessa came home with a firm decision to leave that job. Vanessa, why did you decide to quit so suddenly? I asked. David, I'm tired of this pointless job. I recently met Jeremy, the owner of a dairy factory. He offered me a position as an accountant. His business has expanded, and he needs a new competent employee. My education fits, and I'm tired of standing behind the counter. I want something better in my life, and this is a real opportunity for me. Jeremy? That old cunning fox? People run away from him. He's very stingy and audacious. People complained about unbearable working conditions. Why do you need this? I'm not going to carry sacks or milk cows. I'll be doing intellectual work. And Jeremy promised a good salary and a normal work schedule. I don't know, Vanessa. I wouldn't rush if I were you. I understand you want to change jobs, but you shouldn't jump at the first opportunity. I think things might not be as smooth as they seem. David, I've already made up my mind. This is my chance, and I don't want to miss it. There aren't that many decent job openings in our town. So, I've already agreed. I'll be quitting and moving to a new job. Vanessa surprised me greatly with her decision. She presented it as a fait accompli, not seeking my advice or listening to me. I couldn't understand why she had made such a sudden choice. Everything had been fine and calm until that moment. We always communicated and discussed things together. Now, she didn't even want to listen to me. I knew Jeremy, that old man. He was a rather unpleasant and mean old man for whom money mattered the most. Many people in our town disliked him. I didn't like that Vanessa decided to work for him. She pretended Jeremy was a decent person to collaborate with, but I would never have agreed to it. Vanessa started her new job, and our family harmony was disrupted. She often stayed late at work and went on unclear business trips. All of this began to infuriate me. After all, I also had a responsible job, and our daughter needed care. She needed affection, warmth, and attention to her upbringing. However, Vanessa devoted less and less time to the family. She constantly claimed that she needed to streamline work processes. There were many nuances in her job that needed to be addressed for future productivity. Vanessa insisted it was temporary, that she could handle it, and that these issues just needed to be sorted out. But she could explain this to me. How could she explain it to a little child? I tried to convey to Vanessa that more time needed to be devoted to our daughter. Maternal care was essential now, not later. And it wasn't just about weekdays. Vanessa was often busy on weekends, frequently missing family events. I simply couldn't understand what was happening. Vanessa used to be a kind and caring person who spent a lot of time at home. And we weren't in need. I earned well enough. But now, she pushed her family into the background, becoming cold and uncommunicative. All my attempts to talk to her were futile. I couldn't believe what was happening. Vanessa didn't want to listen to me. She had changed so much, and I didn't understand why. Did that old bastard Jeremy influence her? Or perhaps she had found a lover? These thoughts drove me crazy. Intimacy had long been absent between us. I tried to arrange romantic evenings, create an intimate atmosphere, but Vanessa seemed distant the entire time. I couldn't grasp what was going on in her mind. Vanessa, I want to talk to you more seriously. We need to talk. David, what happened again? Are you going to lecture me again? I'm asking you, please, don't. Vanessa, what's going on? It's like I'm living with a completely different person. I don't know what to think anymore. Why are you behaving like this? Did that old jerk Jeremy influence you so much? David, stop making up all these stories. Jeremy is decent and very kind to me. He treats me well, and I'm just trying to do my job well. There are no secrets or mysteries here. Something very important has come up in my life now. Something important? More important than your daughter, than me? What does that mean? You suddenly became cold and angry. I don't understand what's affecting you. And what's so complicated in your new job that you constantly disappear there? No, David, I love you and our daughter. I'm just working, nothing more. I'm trying to make time for you and our daughter. I see how hard you're trying. It feels like you don't want it yourself. As if you're being forced to be with your own family. I'm fed up with enduring this. Tell me honestly, do you have a lover? David, have you lost your mind? What lover are you talking about? What nonsense. I only have you, and I don't need anyone else. I would never do that to you. I understand why you think this way. Things haven't been smooth between us lately, but I assure you, there's nothing like that here. Let's make a deal. You won't bother me with your tantrums anymore, and I'll try to streamline work processes so that we can spend more time together. I looked at Vanessa and didn't see the person I once knew. I had a feeling that she just didn't care about lying to me. I really wanted to believe that Vanessa was telling the truth, but I couldn't let it slide. I wanted to get to the bottom of it all. Action needed to be taken. But what could I do? Did I really have to follow her? The thought seemed foolish and absurd from the start. After all, I wasn't a detective, and I didn't want to be a paranoid husband who distrusts his wife so much that he's willing to tail her. I explored other options to solve this problem. I cautiously questioned our mutual acquaintances and friends, hoping they had noticed anything strange or seen Vanessa with someone else. However, Vanessa had almost stopped socializing with anyone. We hadn't visited friends together for a long time, and no one had visited our home either. It was all very strange and incomprehensible. I couldn't find the truth anywhere or come across anything that truly helped me uncover it. Everything revolved around Vanessa's new job. I hardly knew who Vanessa worked with. Could there be a secret admirer of my wife whom Vanessa didn't want to talk about? But who could it be? I didn't even know what I would do if I proved myself right. But I tried not to dwell on it for now. Initially, I needed to confront Vanessa. The idea of keeping tabs on her didn't seem as crazy to me anymore. If it helped me figure everything out and dispel these doubts, I was willing to do it. I waited for the right moment to start monitoring Vanessa. I decided to begin tailing her from early in the morning on an ordinary weekday. On that day, I dropped Jenny off at my brother's with his wife. They had days off, and they happily agreed to take care of Jenny. I did it early in the morning to make sure I'd be home before Vanessa left. When I dropped my daughter off, I quickly returned and parked near the house. I waited for Vanessa to leave. Soon, she walked out and headed towards the bus stop. Everything seemed mundane, nothing suspicious was happening. But with each step Vanessa took, I flinched with horror, expecting something to happen any moment. Would she go somewhere else, or would someone approach her and hug her? It was all just terrible. I didn't enjoy doing this, but I had no other choice. Vanessa boarded her bus, and I slowly followed her. At every stop, I scrutinized the crowd exiting the bus to avoid missing my wife. Eventually, we reached her workplace. Vanessa entered the premises. I sat in the car near the entrance, thinking, what's next? What was I even thinking? Sit and stare at these gates all day? Or go in and say that I'm just here to keep an eye on my wife, so I'm hanging around? How silly and pointless is all of this? Time passed. I nervously entertained various thoughts in my mind. My state was truly heavy. In one moment, I wanted to laugh and cry. I was simply going crazy. But I couldn't think of anything else, so I decided not to seek any particular meaning in what I was doing. I just sat in the car, gazing into the distance. And so, evening gradually began to envelop everything in darkness. In the dimming sunlight, the lights at the facility glowed brighter. I felt numb all over. The time came when the staff started leaving the premises one by one. After a while, I spotted Vanessa again. She came out but didn't head towards the bus stop, which alarmed me. Vanessa went in the opposite direction. In a dark spot under branching trees, the headlights of a parked car suddenly lit up. Vanessa quickly got in, and the car drove off. I followed that car. We entered a residential area with quite affluent houses. We arrived at an unfamiliar house to me. Who could this be? I became even more nervous. The automatic gates opened, and the car drove in. I started breathing more often and deeply, trying to formulate a plan for my next actions in my mind. It was challenging to think of something reasonable. I decided to keep it simple. I definitely wasn't going to sit idly in the car anymore. I got out and began surveying the house and its surroundings from a distance. I circled the fence, and in one place, I noticed a branching tree whose branch had likely recently broken and damaged the fence. Here, I could sneak into the yard unnoticed. I slipped inside and approached the house, cautious of dogs or alarms. Fortunately, it was clear, and I was lucky. I reached the house and turned the handle of the entrance doors, which were also unlocked. I started walking through the rooms, searching for Vanessa. Lights were on everywhere, but Vanessa was nowhere to be found. Then I heard the sound of splashing water and a woman's voice. I didn't have time to figure out whom I had heard, but I began moving in the direction of the sound. I cracked the door to the bathroom open and witnessed a shocking scene. Vanessa was on all fours in the jacuzzi, and the one behind her was Jeremy, that old bastard, having intercourse with her. This sight clouded my mind. Anger and hatred spread through my body like a hot wave. "You filthy bastards!" I yelled and rushed towards them. I reached these animals and grabbed Jeremy. I started drowning him in the jacuzzi. Vanessa screamed and jumped out of the jacuzzi. "David? How did you get here?" "David, wait, stop!" Vanessa shouted. I pushed Jeremy away and turned my anger towards Vanessa. I quickly approached her, grabbing her by the hair and staring into her frightened eyes with my enraged gaze. "You shameless creature! Have you completely lost your mind? How could you, you dirty scum?" I could imagine everything, but that you would sleep with this rotten old bastard? "David, please, David, let go, it hurts." "Hurts? Does it hurt, you bitch?" I yelled and pushed her against the wall, releasing her hair. "David, please, Forgive me, forgive me. I made a mistake. I just didn't realize how everything started to change. Shut up, scum. I don't need your excuses. No words will change what you've done. It's just awful. You're a sellout who jumped on this rotten and old bastard. I don't consider you a human anymore, you animal. You fooled me for so long, deceived me. You said it was all work, your new opportunities. What a cynical creature you are. Yes, David, yes. You're right, I've done a terrible thing to you. I got tangled up. It's not me, you know me. I don't know how I agreed to all of this. David, wait. No need to do anything stupid. You don't want trouble, do you? You're a smart man, after all. We can resolve this situation right now. Everyone will be satisfied. I can be very generous. Jeremy interjected, coughing out water. Generous? Are you, bastard, offering me money? Are you out of your mind? I retorted. David, calm down. I'm not only offering you money, but I also promise you that you won't have any problems. You know who I am and what I can do. There's no need to worsen the situation. What? What did you say? Problems? Are you threatening me, you scumbag? To hell with you. First, I did think about leaving, but now, you both will pay. You bastards will beg. And this is the answer to your generous offer. I said and punched Jeremy in the face. I found a rope and tied up these filthy creatures. Jeremy was unconscious from the blow, and it was easy to bind the old man. As for my wife, she wriggled and twisted like a real snake, but it was all in vain. After a while, they were already in the car. I found the keys, opened the gates, and pulled the car closer. I threw these bastards onto the back seat and drove towards my production facility. I knew what I would do with them. By this time, there was no one around, and I had access. I easily entered the premises of my own company and dragged these creatures. I tied them to the conveyor. David, what are you thinking, David? Vanessa asked in hysteria. David, stop, please, think about what you're doing. Jeremy regained consciousness. Shut up, you creatures. I don't need your words. Now I'll give you a little tour. You'll ride this line to a big press that will squeeze all the crap out of you. The remnants of your disgusting bodies will fall into bags at the end of the line. This will be the end of your journey. But get ready, it won't be easy to die. I'll set the conveyor to the minimum speed. The press will crush you part by part until it completely flattens you. Have a pleasant trip, you bastards. I said and activated the conveyor. When the conveyor started moving, these bastards whimpered like beaten dogs. They watched in horror as a huge press ahead of them worked, crushing various metal rejected parts lying between them and the press. They screamed, begged, writhed. I had never heard a person cry so desperately. It was no longer a human scream but some kind of beastly sound. In that time, they experienced true horror. And now, their legs were already under the press. The press began to descend slowly. And now, the press began to press their legs. They whimpered even more from the pain. And then, I stopped the conveyor, lifting the press. Now listen to me, filthy pieces of shit. I'll let you go, I won't stoop to your level. But you'll remember this for the rest of your lives. I don't want to see your pathetic, stinking faces anymore. And if you dare to do anything, then I won't be able to stop. I'll just kill you. You'll die, I promise you. And now, get out of here. I said and released these terrified creatures. Vanessa never dared to step on the threshold of my house again. But that wasn't the end of it. These bastards wanted to destroy me. My action didn't stop them. They decided to seek revenge. Take everything away from me. In the divorce case, Vanessa wanted to claim everything from me. She wanted to take our daughter. I couldn't entrust a child to this greedy creature. For a while, I moved to another place, as now anything could be expected from these scoundrels. But soon, one piece of news changed everything. I learned that these creatures were relaxing at some resort. It was Jeremy's private resort. They were having fun in the sauna, but then something went wrong. The sauna doors got stuck, and the temperature inside kept rising. These bastards couldn't get out. They boiled alive, like crabs in a pot. These creatures didn't listen to me and died a painful death. What was it? I don't know. Fate, divine intervention, or maybe Jeremy crossed paths with someone else with his rotten nature, and someone decided to take revenge cleverly. For me, it didn't matter anymore. Finally, they left me and my daughter alone. That was the main thing. Now, I could try to rebuild my life. About 2 years later, something good finally happened in my life. I met Veronica. I met her when enrolling my daughter in school. She was my daughter's teacher. She immediately caught my eye, but I was afraid to admit it to myself. Veronica noticed that I was struggling, and she began to support and help me gradually and unobtrusively. She brought my daughter to my house, sometimes just visited. And gradually, we became close. And now we lived as a happy family. It helped me forget the unpleasantness of the past and start a new life, brighter and more joyful.